Yeah, I feel like people were a little too tough on Jalen with the dunks, man.
It's like, what do they
I
want
mean,
him to do? Like 1080, just
yeah,
floating
that's what
around
we're
in the
joking about,
air?
right? Like these ridiculous like things that you see on the video game. I just think some of the dunks didn't land the way everyone anticipated, which is part of the reason why he didn't win the contest, right? The kids getting into it with McClung and all that. I do feel like they were like legitimately scared that Jalen was gonna steal it. So it's a good thing that he didn't because he didn't deserve to win the dunk contest. I just think McClung just had better dunks overall. But yeah, some of those dunks just didn't land. I feel like the way Jalen thought that they were going to, and at the end of the day the right guy won, but I don't think it was a situation where, oh, Jalen shouldn't have been in that final round. I felt like he earned it. And I feel like a lot of those dunks, because they were personified, because they stood for his childhood coming from Atlanta, they stood for someone that he was a mentor towards, and Terrence Clark, the late Terrence Clark. I thought that was a special moment, one of my favorite dunks of the night. And I thought the alley oop, the assist rather from Donovan Mitchell was probably his best dunk of the night. But the Jason Tatum one, man, I think that's the one we'll look back on and say that could have been something special, or not. I mean, I fall on that side of the argument. Where do you fall on? Because I feel like some people are like, oh no, it was just a bad dunk overall. Like clearly he wasn't supposed to cover his eyes after dunking the ball, right? So there was a mistake there. We find out after the fact that Jason Tatum and they didn't even practice this thing. They just went up there and did it, and you could tell they didn't practice because the first lob was terrible, and then the second one, I felt like obviously it needed some adjusting because no one's trying to catch a no look from the free throw line, which essentially seemed like it seemed like that's exactly where Tatum put it, and that's impossible to catch. It was just the whole thing was, and then we find out, of course, they didn't practice. That makes sense. It makes
It's a
plenty sense.
combination of the two. He tried to do too many things, too much
But
back
how do
in
you not
one.
practice that, man? This is Tatum Brown. This is supposed to be a special moment. Am I looking too deep into it, Bobby? Am I wearing my green goggles? I guess as John Stans would say, or some Celtics fans would say, because how do you botch that moment where it would have been obviously Jalen's moment, but you share it with your All Star teammate? It would have been something special.
Yeah, it's obviously something you had to practice and spend some time on, and that makes you question whether Brown even knew what he was going to do in that spot up until the very end of the first half,
Right.
and they go away, and maybe he comes up with it at that point. He said it looked better in his head than it did in person, but it just leads us back to
Yeah.
that same conversation we've had of how much they interact, how much they talk, how much they collaborate on something like this. Clearly not a ton, but he still felt strong enough to have him out there and involved in it. So I think it shows, number one, the progress they've made in their relationship to even be able to share that moment. But number two, that the chemistry isn't natural, and we saw that throughout the weekend.
Dude, it feels forced now. It felt like, oh, if we don't do this, they're gonna make this a story. So can you come out here and give me a lob or whatever? We don't have to practice it or anything. You can go back to the rest of your night because that's what Tatum did, right? He went out there, he gave one bad pass, gave a mediocre one, actually probably not as bad, but just as almost just as bad pass, and he got the heck out of there and continued his night. I thought that part was weird too, like. And listen, maybe I'm from the older generation where I just remember the Chris Webbers and the Shaquille O'Neal, like all the All Stars hanging around just to see that event. Never mind if one of those guys was a teammate of them, an All Star teammate. They're hanging out that entire event. Especially if that teammate makes it to the finals. I don't know, man. The whole thing was a little weird. I'm not gonna say that these guys don't have a great relationship and that's the reason why, but it's a little weird, right?
It's strange. You had 10, 15 more minutes at the end there if you're Tatum, where you could have stayed and supported him for the final round. And he just ventured off. And it's not a huge deal. I'm sure he had somewhere else to go. There's events throughout these nights and days, which is in part, a conversation I had with Nick in another video, why the game's probably
I
is
want to watch
bad.
that because I'm preaching to the choir with Nick on this one. I'm sure I am, but I just think you can also say, hey, Tatum wanted him to have that moment. I mean, either way, it's just one of those things where it speaks to how different their relationship are, or at least how it's not as people may assume it is.
Yeah, and I think there's other examples from the weekend even that make you say there could have been some more interaction, some more chemistry visible between those two here that would help on the court. And we've had this conversation a million times. Do you got to be friends? Do you got to have a connection off the court to succeed on? And I think we've let them off the hook at different points and said, no, it's fine. As long as they figure it out on the court, you can be completely different people out there. But Kevin Durant said one of the reasons this works so well with him and Booker so far is that they hang out, they talk, and they have a connection off the court. You had the same deal with Lillard in his MVP speech after the game. Said it's been crucial to have that time with Giannis off the court at the All-Star game to figure out what they're doing in the second half, issues from the first half. It's forced them to have those conversations. So that's two superstar duos right there saying that off-the-court dynamics are important. And Drew Holiday, even in one of his first interviews with the Celtics, I think I asked him, how much do you have to be close off the court, have that connection off the court to succeed on it? And he said, I don't know how you do it without it. So the consensus seems to be that you have to have some level of chemistry off the court. And it makes sense to me, right? Because after a bad loss, are they talking and trying to figure out what went wrong? After a bad play, in a tense moment in the game, do they have that communication ability? Especially to keep each other accountable, too.
Right.
Are they just two separate guys doing their own thing on the floor?
Or are they just co-workers?
Yeah.
That's essentially what we're asking.